This is Two Hands of Philosophy, in which my friends and I discuss philosophical topics to learn from each other and from our readings. This week we discussed Definition by Richard Robinson, published in 1950, and discuss its central topic, the theory of definition in the philosophy of language, but also its implications for realism and nominalism. Today, again, I'll be speaking with my good friend, Theral Timpson. Hey, Theral, how you doing?
Good. Doing great. It's raining like crazy out there, thunderstorm and lightning.
No, I'm so jealous. I've had like two thunderstorms in all the years that I've been here in San Francisco.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So if you hear some booming, that's not me. That's my house quaking. It looks like we have a few more banks to go in the summer. We get a summer monsoon here in southern Utah.
Oh. Okay, this conversation is long coming. I think that we've been having it off and on over the years, uh, and I'm very, very excited to get into it. As and it's got two sides to it. One is the question of realism and nominalism, which constantly comes up. In fact, it's come up in our conversations about biology, which is largely what motivated this shift to this question. And then there's the question of verbal disputes. That is, how to negotiate definitions of terms in philosophical discussion, or just more broadly, what understanding is there, uh, might there be about how we define words, how words get their meaning, and and what freedom we have in defining words at in the course of our conversations to aid us in any kind of argument. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds great. So did you want me to summarize it?
no, I'll go ahead. I
Oh,
just wanted to lay out first the questions. So as context, of course, we read Robinson, and I think he has much the same ambition as us, maybe more focused on particular issues in definition. But I want to highlight some of the questions that he addresses, and then give um, an outline of his answer. So he begins by asking, what exactly are definitions? How should we define terms, whether we should do it at the beginning or the end of a text or of a conversation? Might there be terms that are indefinable? What is the relation of definition to truth? Do definitions, is anything true by definition? Uh, is there any set procedure that should be employed in defining terms? What kinds of definitions are there? And most interestingly, which is the heart of the book, is there some difference between nominal definitions and real definitions, where nominal definitions are relations among words and real definitions are relations among things? I think what's most innovative, to my mind, in his treatment of the topic is that whereas he recognizes that there exist nominal definitions as relations between words, what he calls word-word definitions, and also real definitions, uh, relations between things, there are also, that is, thing-thing definitions, there are also word-thing definitions, which he assimilates to the nominal definitions, or a species of nominal definitions. And these are, he insists, the most important category of definition, because ultimately language is about communicating about the world. We communicate in language, and the world is something more than just mere language. Then he goes on to say that there are two kinds of nominal definitions, lexical and stipulative, where the lexical definitions are reports on past usage. That is, they are roughly what dictionaries do, understood as descriptive documents rather than prescriptive documents. And then there are stipulative definitions, which I suppose is how we sometimes misunderstand dictionaries to be written, as legislation of how we ought to speak. We can, outside the context of a dictionary, at the beginning of a text, for instance, do the same thing in declaring that such and such terminology will be used in certain ways for the duration of the text, and thereby achieve something, either it may be abbreviation or an improvement in thinking and speaking that might extend beyond the document itself. He goes at length to describe the difference between stipulation and and lexical definition, and assigns to each appropriate place and thereby answers various questions that come up in the nature of definition. Then he uh, uh, outlines a number of different ways by which we can achieve definitions, whether lexical or stipulative. They might be pointing, that is, ostension, providing synonyms, analysis, synthesis, abstraction, uh, um, denotation, which is like enumeration, giving rules, and various other things. All of these have their own flavor. Sometimes apply, sometimes don't apply, and I learned a great deal from thinking about all of this. And then finally, there's the real definition. The question of the real definition: does it even really occur? The context that motivates this are the dialogues of Plato in which he's having Socrates ask, what is piety? What is justice? What is courage or knowledge? And we are to understand this not as some kind of lexicographical investigation into how we actually use words, but rather an investigation into knowledge, piety, courage, justice themselves. We are, as it were, defining reality. This is important because nominal definition is, at least on the stipulative end of things, and only to some degree, but all the same to some degree, arbitrary and therefore admits of freedom. That is, we can speak however we wish within limits, and it is on that basis that we can account for the diversity across languages. This, by the way, is the topic of one of the Platonic dialogues, the Cratylus, where it is disputed whether the meanings of words are natural or arbitrary at all. It's a very odd dialogue to read because I don't think anybody today would argue that the words have natural meanings, that as if given by God. Pascal is mentioned by Robinson as someone who also believed this. So we all accept that there's an arbitrariness to the meanings of words, and yet it can't be entirely arbitrary because without any constraints at all, communication would be impossible. And I think that it is in thinking about all of these issues that we can address the dispute, the metaphysical dispute between nominalism and realism that you and I always run aground of. Now, that wasn't his intent. I don't think that was Robinson's intent in the book, but I found it, against expectation, one of the best defenses of metaphysical realism, of one of reduced ambition, but one that fits my own particular take on it, in that rather than posturing that anything but metaphysical realism descends into a kind of relativistic nihilism, or in defense of nominalism, posturing that the realist is somehow engrossed in mysticism or flights of fancy, he just looks at the nature of how we use language, in particular how we define words, and notices that we aren't always merely arbitrarily assigning some words to other words or some things to words independently of nature as it is, but instead trying to align those definitions, especially the real definitions, with the actual contours of reality, what we have called, metaphorically, carving nature at its joints. This book is, I think, a defense of what it is in the defining of words to carve nature at its joints. And that's what I would like to impress upon you, that we can actually do that. What do you think, Theral?
It was a beautiful book. I mean, thanks for bringing it up and suggesting it. It's so comprehensive. One thing I loved about it is he's quoting other philosophers, from the history of philosophy. You've mentioned Plato and Aristotle, and I think you mentioned Pascal. He quotes Locke a bit, and then his examples. He's got examples for everything. So many words in here. Such fascinating thing. Study, but I would call it more a study of language. And I found that absolutely fascinating because this is the thing we do that I don't think we talk about that much. And it, of course, took me to Wittgenstein, late Wittgenstein. I mean, this is where I've sort of been the most satisfied on this topic. How is it that we learn the meanings of words? is from Wittgenstein. But the name of the book is Definition, and from the first couple chapters, I thought he was really going to take a position on definition that was to us using definition as basically a proof of realism. And I guess you've kind of hinted at that, which I was like, that's very ambitious. After reading the book now, um, not the last chapter, but most of the book, um, I, I, I don't think all of that is definition. I think he's talking about language and meaning. I think definition is pretty simple. He quotes Carnap in here as can't remember where the quote is, but Carnap is saying that definition is basically the translation in the same language of one word to other words. And I think that is what definition is. And so I definitely think definition is nominal. And so one thing he breaks down in the first chapter is you talked about nominal versus real definition. But he breaks it down further. He talks about word definition. And his example for that is to say that the French word or the German word wrote means the French word rogue. And he said, let's say you didn't know what those words were.
Rouge, right?
What they meant. Rouge. Let's say you didn't know what those words meant. That's a word definition. Then he says there's a word thing kind of definition. And you mentioned this and you went through several. He gives the way that we do that, either through analysis or synthesis, or just explication. And he says, yes, that's nominal definition too. And then he said there's thing. And so I'm going, huh? What's thing? How does a thing get with another thing if our minds are not in there doing it with a word? And that's what he called real definition. So I thought, I'm going to disagree with this guy on real definition. But it turns out as you get down to the chapter on real definition, that he has a list of 12 examples, and he says like 8 or 9 of them are actually just nominal definition, disguising themselves as real definition, which we'll get into. But then there are some kinds of real definition, but he never comes back and says why it's thing. So yeah, that's my take on the book. The other thing I would say is this book was written in the heyday of linguistic philosophy at Oxford. So,
yes. Actually,
right.
were you able to verify that he's British? I mean, sometimes I got the impression that he's American because his examples speak to U.S. law and presidents.
Well, both, right? Yeah, no, he is British, studied at Oxford, but then he did come and teach in America for 20 years at Oxford.
Oh, that explains it. Okay.
Then went back to Oxford.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think this has been at the heart of a lot of our discussion in the past. And I've told you that, it's been hard for me not to get sucked into linguistic philosophy. So let's talk a little bit about what is linguistic philosophy. This is the idea that most philosophical problems could be solved by paying more attention to language. And it became really popular. You could maybe say Wittgenstein was one of the first. Then there were his proteges. And you have J.L. Austin with Speech Acts at this time. This book came out in 1954. I think Speech Acts was written in 1954. I don't know when it was published. Now, linguistic philosophy is not to be confused with philosophy of language, which just concerns itself with language and how language happens. So one of the questions we could ask about this book is this linguistic philosophy, or is it philosophy of language?
Well, I would say I would say it's definitely both. It's
It's
obviously
both.
philosophy of language in that it would be relevant to philosophy of language today. Frankly, I think it's the best book I've ever read on definition, even if it is now 70 years old. Uh, but we are well past the age of linguistic philosophy or ordinary language philosophy. When I hear the phrase linguistic
Okay, so
philosophy,
yeah, so you just said ordinary language philosophy. You would you say that this is an example of ordinary language philosophy?
when I think of linguistic philosophy, I think of the union that is taking together of both ordinary language philosophy and the positivists, because they too were obsessed with language, and in fact, both schools uh, 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 take their lead from the Tractatus by Wittgenstein. But the ordinary language philosophers are more, I mean, the essential difference is the extent to which they are in love with symbolic systems and formal logic in particular. The ordinary language philosophers, less so. So this definitely be an example of ordinary language philosophy, just like Austin. A very good example of it indeed. And
Yeah,
and
that's what I thought. I mean,
mhm.
it's just so clear, written in absolute ordinary language. And we might say that the idea with that was that traditional philosophical problems, they were thinking, J.L. Austin and I would say Robinson, are rooted in misunderstandings that philosophers have developed over the years by distorting or forgetting how words are ordinarily used to convey meaning, right? Like in non-philosophical contexts.
Yes, although I
So
wouldn't say
that's quite an agenda.
yes, although I don't think that it was pure self-flagellation. I don't think they wanted to say, at least not all of them, that the confusion was introduced by the philosophers themselves. Rather that it was culture-wide, and that this new this new approach to philosophical problems was to at least take consciousness of these confusions and to tease them apart and overcome them. I it, and I think to the extent that that method pays off, this is an excellent example of it. I think that's exactly what he manages to do. I want to say another bit of praise, offer another bit of praise for Robinson, and that is that this book and this period actually stands at the end of of um, of a philosophical education that is steeped in the classics. You know, he's making constant reference not only to his immediate predecessors, but also to uh, Locke, Kant, Plato, Aristotle, Spinoza, and everybody in between. Whereas these days, that seems to be left to the historians of ideas or specialists in any one of those thinkers. And those who are
Mm.
actively in pursuit of some particular question mostly just take up the state of the art as it is in the last decade or two and carry it forward as though it were a scientific discipline. I don't think that's always a mistake, but it's a breath of fresh air to see the conversation having a kind of integrity from the beginning to the present. You see this in particular, for example, in his treatment of the concepts of analysis and synthesis, which he relates to originating metaphors in the Odyssey. Uh, Whereas today, I think we would take these terms more or less as though they were stipulated terms of art in the profession and not worry very much about their history. That is sometimes a workable method, but here I think we see the fault of that kind of ignorance, especially given that the topic is definition, right? The
Mm.
second thing I like about this period is that, unlike the vast history of philosophy that was very self-aware of itself as a discipline with a history, it does employ new methods. That is, it is very self-consciously aware, if not of formal logic, at least of the special care and attention that is deserved to every single word and every single thought, and without fear of contradicting authorities such as Locke and Spinoza in the establishment of very simple ideas. So it has both the modern self-assuredness of philosophy of the 20th century forward, but also the foundation and base of the classical tradition. I think that having both of these was true for only a few decades, and 1950 seems to be one of those moments.
I think I mean, thanks for pointing that out. I think I agree with you, and that's probably why I really paid attention to all those examples. It was just nice to have that continuity from all of philosophy. And you know that my personal approach in reading philosophy has been to go back and read some of those original texts because, you know, I didn't major in philosophy, so I'm still catching up on all that. So it's great. But the major point I was making about 1954 is just to set a kind of context for this book.
Yes,
And I think
actually,
his ambition is much. I think we're justified in thinking that his ambition is much bigger than defining definition.
I
I
would hope
do
so.
think he's making some
Yeah.
implications about ontology
Yes.
and, of course, epistemology.
Yes, both definitely, and that's what makes this more than a theoretical tract in linguistics or lexicography. It's philosophy in virtue of having something to say about the core topics of metaphysics and epistemology. But it's subtle. He doesn't. It's not the center of the exposition. It's kind of fun to evaluate the work on its own terms, since he's giving us a theory of what definition is. But in the process of the book, he is effectively defining the term definition, and we might judge whether he's doing that successfully or not. Going now into the content, you are
Well,
um,
can I just ask you before you
mhm.
get into why did you find this? Why this particular topic and why now? We've just been doing biology. I just wanted to give you a chance to connect that.
Okay, thank you. Uh, You know, um, well, first of all, we had always planned on jumping around to various topics. To be
Hmm.
fair, I actually thought we would do biology for a few sessions before meandering off to, say, the philosophy of normativity or of function or of science. Something gradual. But I think what I realized in the heat of our discussions that some attention was deserved to the core topics of nominalism and and the meanings of words, like how we go about defining terms in a discussion, what the role of nominalism and realism as underlying principles really is playing in discussions that are more specialist, such as about the gene, uh, and and um, and so I just was poking around, doing research on what might have been written speaking to these questions at a basic level. And I had some difficulty actually finding something, which is why I ended up with something written in 1954. I think it's actually maybe 1950. I've got 1954 is in the book, but 1950 is in the Phil Papers entry, so I'm not really sure which it is. At any rate, it's the early 50s. I think what I liked about this book is that it very explicitly tied questions of ontology to questions of language, and that is not something I've seen very often. Additionally, I do believe that there is a prevailing tendency in the philosophy of language and philosophy more generally in favor of nominalism. And I
Hmm.
I was
Oh,
I
wow.
participate. Yes, oh yeah, for sure. And I participated in that tendency for a long time. But I think eventually I turned against it. And so I wanted something that would speak to my views, or at the very least, I mean, not agree with them necessarily, but at least address them. And I was having a hard time finding something closer to the present that did that justice without being overly technical and relying on familiarity with too many prior conversations and issues. But this one's perfect. It assumes almost nothing and isn't technical at all. Uh, it's beautifully written. I just found it by luck, really. It was in a bibliography. I think of an encyclopedia entry. I maybe reviewed 10 other things, and when I came across this one, I thought this is definitely the one for us. And I had never heard of Robinson. In fact, I can't find anything else that he's written other than some essays on ancient philosophy.
He wrote a book before this, something like the atheist's ethics.
Oh, I didn't even know that one. He has a collection of essays on ancient Greek philosophy and then something else about one particular dialogue. I mean, there may be other things, but it didn't seem that he was a prolific philosopher of language. My guess is that he was trained in the Oxford School. He was inspired to write this, but then his intellectual interests took him elsewhere, and he did not become another Austin or Strawson. If you know what I mean?
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
he could have been
Yeah.
easily. This is fantastic. Okay, so to the
Cool.
issue, uh, he has many targets, not just one. Okay, but one of them is the view that definitions are always word um, definitions, or even always nominal, where nominal is inclusive of the word definitions and also the word thing definitions. And I think the heart of his argument is that such definitions uh, leave out the purpose of communication. Instead, what he offers, so for example, translation uh, only really aids the recipient of the definition when the concept is already available to him.
Hmm.
If I don't have the concept of red, then you're telling me that rote and rouge are equivalent will not be helpful. In fact, it won't even relate to red unless you use the word thing definition as well. So that's one problem. And the other is more evident in his proposal for what definition ultimately is. That is, what is it that brings all definitions together, including the real definitions? And that is instructions by which one person can make another uh, aware of how to use a word. So it's what basically uh, makes words available to our vocabulary. And and doing so will require more than mere word equivalences, because it isn't merely the internal relations among words that make them useful.
Hmm. Okay. So you like that position.
Uh,
That would be your position too. Is that right?
yes, I more or less agree with everything in the book except his treatment of essence, and even then, I mostly agree with it to the extent that we identify essence with whatever Aristotle was doing.
Okay. So you believe in the word thing definition.
Yeah, I think that's essential to definition. I think the utility of real definition and the utility of nominal, that is word definition, is a derivative of the utility of word thing definitions.
Oh yeah. Okay. So here's where I had a problem. Um, First of all, how did okay? So I do believe in things.
Oh,
All
one more
right.
thing.
I am
One
a
more thing.
realist. I am a
One,
realist.
one
Go
more
ahead.
thing. By way of setting context, it's important to observe that Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations, which has been extremely influential, and to you as well, and to me as well, had not been published, right? So this is not written in light of that work.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I wondered about that because did Wittgenstein release it periodic? Did he released essays, right? Then the whole thing was combined after he died and published.
Well, okay. I mean, that's a good point. If you were in the midst of these people and everyone was talking about Wittgenstein, you will have become aware of some of his ideas. The Blue and Brown books, which are published earlier than 1950, I don't know exactly when, but probably 30s or 40s, were in currency, although not strictly speaking published. So he might have been aware. He surely was aware of some of the ideas. However, the lingo of language games or of meaning as derived from social practice, and much of the rest that we have come to associate, like the private language argument, that we have come to associate with philosophical investigations, was
Mm-hmm.
not anywhere in this book. I didn't see it present at all. All mentions of Wittgenstein were clearly identifiable with the Tractatus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, I can see your point there. Right. So so anyway, getting right into the argument, right? Here's my issue with word thing. So I believe in things, but how do you get to the thing? So you're comparing a word to a thing, but all we have are words for things. Okay.
Yes.
And so definitions end up being words being equivalent to other words. And I know the word equivalent, it's true, but there's also a lot of other things you could say. It's similar to other words. Um, it's equals. Oh, equals is, yeah, equivalent. But I don't know how you get to the thing without words.
Right.
And
Well,
maybe that's what the whole piece is about. So here's what I felt like. I felt like I had some issues with his fundamental argument. So if this guy was planning a city, and he laid out his three major streets, boulevards in the beginning, I took big issue with those boulevards. But at the same time, when he populated them and went from boulevard to boulevard and filled it with buildings and houses and trees, I thought all that was lovely. I agreed with all that, but I have a hard time with his fundamental, the way he structured it.
mhm.
And then the thing, I mean, that
Yeah, how
sounds
did that
like Eastern mysticism to me. I don't know how you even go to a thing, let alone know what's going on between things.
right, right.
Does that make any
Well,
sense?
yes. Um, well, okay. So just to begin with, um, how do we get to the things? Well, you could just point to them. You can just literally say, "He is John." Okay. Well, you could just say John. John is present to you. You see him, and that is all there is to it. I think he dwells quite a bit on objections to this, uh, that would reject that this even qualifies as a definition. But then he says this is because if we suppose the definition is something that can be introduced into a dictionary, then of course pointing to an object is not something that can be captured in a dictionary, which is at best words for words. But if we understand definition more broadly, as he suggests, as whatever means, uh, um, or the means by which we instruct the use of a word, then surely in a given context, that is when the thing to be named is present, we can simply point to the thing in order to define the word. Our access to the
Right.
things isn't mediated by language any more than our perceptual faculties are a teletype. It's like we're not texting with the world; we're seeing and manipulating the world.
Not texting the world. Okay, that's good. That's cool. Yeah, no, that's called the ostensive method, right? And I remember Wittgenstein gets into this right early in philosophical investigations. Talks about, how did we learn numbers? How did we learn red? How did we learn apple? We walked into the market, we pointed to the apple. People knew what we wanted. But that seems to me to be talking about language. How is that a definition?
Well, I mean, we're defining words, so how is it failing to be about language if we're defining words?
Right. Okay. So we point to a red apple and we say apple.
Yeah.
And we basically, if the person did not know the name, they would get that connection. And so
Right.
something happens in their brain and they're able to connect these things and they go, voila.
That's it.
And, one of the distinctions that I love that he makes is there's two ways of that happening. A person gains some knowledge of the word. Oh, that's apple.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's instances, which maybe dodecahedron or something like that, where the person actually learns what the thing is. The thing is,
Yes.
as well as the word.
Yes. But there's two ways of doing that, right? So you can use the denotative method, which is, or rather the synonym method. You might say a dodecahedron is like a pentagon, except with 12 instead of 5 sides. But you don't have to draw it. So in that sense, there's no ostension.
Mm.
But you could also draw it and leave it to the hearer to count the sides. Or if they know the relevant language, they know that the dodecahedron has the word 12 in it.
So how is that a definition? I mean, let's say you're telling a person a dodecahedron is like a pentagon but with 12 sides. And then the person, boom, sees this kind of image in their mind,
Yeah.
and then they learn, oh, that's dodecahedron. I mean, I learn concepts all the time in biology, right? And I just go look it up on Wikipedia, or I'm coming along and I can kind of infer the definition from a paragraph that it's in. Um, so is that a definition? Is that mental step of learning meaning the same thing as definition?
Well, I mean, what he's doing in the book is defining definition, right? And there is a specter of circularity here in that if he offers a seemingly inappropriate definition to definition, on what account can we criticize the work? But if we hold his work to its own standards and ask ourselves, is he defining definition appropriately? Then, uh, then I think we can begin to answer. So maybe before I answer your question, we can speak briefly about the difference between lexical and stipulative definition, or just expand on it since I already mentioned it to some extent.
Sure.
Uh, I think that his effort is is partially lexical and partially stipulative. That is, it is lexical in as much as he recognizes that when we define words, what we're doing um, is aiding each other in our competence with the usage of words, and that to the extent that the definition offered isn't a mere repetition of something found in the textbooks or in common education, it has a legislative aspect to it. I don't know that I've ever heard the word definition defined as Robinson defines it. And yet I find it so compelling in place, that is in the context of the work, that I want to now employ the word in accordance with this definition henceforth. But I don't take myself to be doing so uh, merely because I'm free to do so. That is, I don't think I'm applying the doctrine of freedom, as he calls it, in defining the word however I wish. I think that it very closely matches what I have understood the point of definition to be all along.
Mhm.
When we begin a text, if that is, begin reading a text, and are familiar with the meanings of most of the words, the vast majority, but come across one that we don't know, our first thought is to define it, either to see if the author has previously defined it or soon will, or maybe does so in a footnote, or maybe there's an entry in the dictionary if we're just uh, supplementing our education. Maybe we don't have the prerequisites, or we can just ask someone who's in a position to know, hey, do you know what this word means? Or as you said, you can just look it up on Wikipedia, uh, which is not exactly a dictionary, but if there's an entry, a reference entry for the word, we can effectively get a implicative definition, that is a definition of its use in place. Uh, and so what am I doing? What are we doing in all of these cases? It seems to me that what we're doing is strengthening our vocabulary. We are we are taking that word and making it one of our own. Now, the word definition was already one of my own. I didn't need this book. And yet, was it? To the extent that we find ourselves, or that I find myself, run aground in discussions uh, that end because there are calls for definition and perhaps no satisfaction of the call. I mean, it's not unusual for people to demand that I give them the definition of some word before the argument progresses, and I have nothing to offer. Just recently, somebody argued with me regarding uh, the realism of numbers. Uh,
Hmm.
to
That's
define
fun.
causation, sorry,
That's fun.
Yes. Well, I was arguing for, and he was arguing against.
Hmm.
And he said that for something to be real, it needs to be causally efficacious. If it doesn't have any causes, if it doesn't cause anything to happen, it's not real. By analogy with Harry Potter. So Harry Potter, not the novel, but the
Okay.
boy. Yeah, Harry Potter, not the novel, but the boy. It doesn't have any causal consequences. Nothing that Harry Potter the boy does is going to affect me. In contrast with J.K. Rowling, what she does affect me. Uh, but then if we recognize that Harry Potter is not real, that he's merely imagined, that he is a fiction, then what are numbers? Are they more like you and me, or more like Harry Potter? And he was arguing that they are more like Harry Potter, effectively arguing for a fictionalism in mathematics.
Well, I think
And I,
numbers are definitely causative. We use them just when you go into the grocery store and say, "Give me 5 red apples." That's causative, or
yeah,
or
I hear what you're
causes
saying.
things in the world. I think
Mhm.
Harry Potter also causes things. Has
Oh,
caused a lot of things.
oh, interesting. Uh,
Yeah. No,
okay.
that is a great question.
Okay,
Um,
well, look, I don't want to get into it. The point is,
yeah.
he and I, anyway, agreed that Harry Potter doesn't cause anything, and that numbers don't either, at least not in the sense of efficient cause, though maybe in the sense of formal cause, although he didn't admit to that. So, but the question was about existence, right? And then he runs the argument aground by saying to me, "Well, can you define to me what cause is?" And I said, "Look, I'm not going to give you an analysis of causation, as a kind of interjection in the space of a larger argument, as a prerequisite to continuing on with it. You know what causation is. You've been using the word your whole life. You may not know everything there is to know about it, but neither do I, nor do I need to know in order to object to the idea that for something to be real, it must be causal." So, so that was my counter, right? And he wasn't entirely satisfied, but why not? I think the reason he wasn't satisfied is ultimately because we were at odds about the nature of definition. What is definition? What is it for? What role does it play in argument? I think it's not an accident that the Aristotelian source of the traditional rules of definition. Do you remember the section on the traditional rules of definition?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, that was fun.
yeah, and
He
his
disagreed with
takedown.
most of them.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I love that. The source of that is Aristotle's Topics, and as Robinson
Hmm.
points out a couple of times, Aristotle is not here engaged in a treatise of how we acquire our vocabulary, but instead uh, laying out some norms for how we should engage in disputations. And I think it's very
Well,
telling,
that's the
right?
point. Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. We'll never know everything, and will we ever know the ultimate definition of something? I mean, one of the sections I loved here was that he pointed out at least lexical definitions are historical. Okay, and overall, the feeling I got from him, I thought it was a great combination of historicism and realism. I was going to say essentialism, but I mean, it seems to me if you argue for a real definition, it's pretty hard to do it without essentialism. So I have to read more on that section, go back and reread it. But he has a great combination in here of historicism and essentialism,
I'm not
and
so
I
sure about that.
totally agree with the historicism. Where he talks about the lexical definition and what dictionaries do, and the fact that all words are histories, right? So it's always evolving, and I don't know if we'll ever have the final. We won't ever have the final definition of a word.
Hmm.
We'll have the most recent.
Okay. Well, it depends on what you mean by final. If what you mean is, will the evolution of language ever come to a standstill? No, of course not. Languages come and go as empires and nations come and go. But um, there can be a finality to the structure, the conceptual structure of a language. That is, there may not be an end to nominal definitions, but there may well be an end to real definitions, in as much as reality is of unchanging reality, or rather, in as much as any of reality is unchanging. Now, that takes us deep into the question of real definition. But before we go there, I want to address your observation that he is, by way of making the distinction and being inclusive of both, of lexical and stipulative definitions, that is, finding a place for both, that he is hybridizing historicism and realism. I would not agree with that at all. I would think that both the lexical and the stipulative definitions are realist, and that there's no historicism at all. But that might just be because of a difference in our understanding of historicism.
But he comes right out and says words are words and meaning are historical things.
Indeed, they are, right. But I'm not saying that. I'm not saying.
Oh, so you're disagreeing with him?
No, I'm not. I'm disagreeing with you. I do agree that words, or rather, that lexical definitions are historical. But that doesn't mean that that his theory of lexical definition is historicist. There's a difference between historicism and pertaining to history. Historicism is a relativization to historical periods, but his account of the historical meanings of words is not historicist, because what the history of a word is a truth of the present, about the past. And that truth of the present doesn't vary as we progress into the future. That is, what today is the past of the word will tomorrow also be the past of the word, except that there will be more past to add to the story. So it's important that we understand. Maybe we can pick that up another time, talk about the difference between on my account, a realist conception of history and a historicist conception.
Well, that's fine. We can do it another time. But the word that you use there, that we have to be careful. This is where I started to actually agree with him, give in to him, and realize that I was not that much at odds with him. And that is, you used the word truth. Okay, you said it could be true. It is true now of the past. And one of the big points in the book is that a definition is not a true-false claim. Okay. So once he said that, I realized I don't need to worry about realism or nominalism, because he doesn't think definitions are truth claims.
Yeah. I don't think that's right. He asks whether definitions have truth value. And what he concludes is that the lexical definitions do have truth value, because they are effectively reports on past usage, and either it is the past usage or it isn't.
Oh, okay. So we read that differently. Well, I'll be looking that up and sending it to you afterwards.
We can do it right now. It wouldn't take me long to find. But before I do acknowledge that he says that the stipulative definitions have no truth value. But I would disagree with him on this point. I think, in light of philosophy that has been developed since 1950, I think we can give a more nuanced take on the relation of truth to stipulation. So let me just briefly lay this out. Suppose I say,
oh, okay, go ahead. Yeah, but I just found the quote, so I'm ready.
Oh, perfect. Tell me the page number. Let's do that first.
35.
All right, hold on.
It begins with the section lexical definition.
Right.
Third paragraph. Lexical. Are you there?
Yeah. Go ahead, read.
Lexical definition is a form of history. It refers to the real past. It tells what certain persons meant by a certain word at a certain less or more specified time and place. Okay. So that's that. I mean, he just comes right out and calls it history. Then he starts talking about
he also calls it real. The real past. That's realism.
Yeah, he does talk about real, but he doesn't talk. So let's see if I can find where he talks about, it's not a true statement.
Well, at the beginning, in the first chapter, there's a section that speaks to whether definition has a truth value. Why don't we go straight there?
Okay.
That's page 5. He may not say very much. No, he doesn't. He just raises the question.
He just raises it, but he does get into it later.
He does, yes.
And you're right about the stipulative. In the stipulative, which is when a person stipulates their own definition, say at the beginning of the book or the beginning of a speech, to make a certain point, to sort of go beyond the standard definition. He says, is the person as free as Humpty Dumpty?
Yes.
Who, in is it Alice in Wonderland or whatever? Says I can, words will mean whatever I say they are. He said, do we have that kind of freedom, or are we limited to? And I think he does talk about truth and falseness.
Do you think we have that freedom? I mean, I think he rejects that we have that freedom, but what do you think?
He says okay, the feeling I had coming away from that is that we have a lot of freedom. We can definitely stipulate. We have the freedom to stipulate, but we're somewhat limited.
Well, but the question is,
as to the definitions that we stipulate.
But the question is, do we have the freedom to do what Humpty Dumpty did?
No.
Okay. All right. Let me come back to that. I found the section on truth. It's 39, top of the page. I want to read this out loud.
Okay. Oh yeah, truth value. There we go.
Yeah. So has a definition truth value? This is in the section or the chapter on lexical definition. So it's focused on lexical definition here. It says, it is obvious that lexical definitions has a truth value. Dr. Johnson's definition of pastern. Do you know this word? I don't know. I didn't.
It's a famous criticism of Dr. Johnson, and I looked it up, and his definition was the knee of a horse, if I remember right. And there's, I read a quotation. Someone asked him where he came up with that, and he said, "Ignorance, pure ignorance."
What does that mean? Was he just messing with them? Was the point that he just made it up?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this was a funny guy. And let me just take a minute and read you a couple of his definitions. These are under examples of he actually used humor in some of his definitions. This is considered the first great dictionary of the English language. There were dictionaries before, but they tended to be focused on like legal terms and very specialized terms. This was the first great dictionary that was everyday language in English. So here's a definite lexicographer, a writer of dictionaries, a harmless drudge that busies himself in tracing the original and detailing the signification of words. Oats, a grain which in England is generally given to horses, but in Scotland supports the people.
Reminds me of Ambrose Pierce. I forget the last name. The Devil's Dictionary. Do you know that?
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
Do you?
I've heard of it.
Maybe we can look up.
But I don't read it
from those. Okay, let me just read this again. Okay, so Dr. Johnson's definition of pastern was false, and false in just the same sense as if he had said that King George was a woman. The people whose language the dictionary was supposed to be about did not use the word in the way he said they did. Lexical definitions are historical assertions, and all historical assertions are true or false insofar as they are definite. Those who wish to minimize the part played by truth and falsity in definition may here make the following remark. Quote, the lexical definition that Hund means dog is a way of saying that the Germans follow the rule of uttering the word Hund when they wish to signify a dog, and of thinking a dog when they hear the word Hund, unquote. It is a way of saying that the Germans observe a certain rule of meaning. Now, a rule has no truth value. It cannot be either true or false, and the important thing here is the rule. This is what someone might say.
Yeah, by the way, that's the part that reminded me of Wittgenstein.
Yes, as a matter of fact, the idea that meaning is rule following is straight out of the Tractatus. So I think you're right on there. This remark, however, is consistent with lexical definitions having a truth value. Though a rule is neither true nor false, a statement that certain people observe a certain rule is either true or false, and a lexical definition is such a statement. As to the opinion that the important thing here is the rule, well, if this is only a report of the objector's interests and preferences, it must be accepted, and it does not contradict anything we've said. If it means that the rule is an important matter, it is true and again innocuous. If it means that the rule is more important than the statement that the rule exists, it's hardly decidable, for the two things are important in such different contexts. If, lastly, it means that the statement that the rule exists is unimportant, well, that's false.
Yeah, so I remember reading that now, and I agree with that. Um,
Okay.
so there he is threading the needle, right? He's
Yes.
saying that a rule by nature can't be true or false, um, but some of the content in the rule,
No.
you can't just say that the King of England is a woman.
No, no, no. The point is not that the content in the rule has truth value, but rather that the lexical definition is not a rule. The lexical definition is um, is the association that uh, that some population observes by the rule. So they either do observe it or they don't, and that can be true or false.
Oh, right,
So
exactly.
when
He's
so when
not disagreeing that definition is a rule.
no, he is.
Oh, he
He's
is?
saying, yeah, he's saying that it's not merely a rule.
Not
There's more to it than that.
merely.
It's a historical fact. The rule doesn't have to have an associated historical fact because it could be a rule that no one observes.
Hmm. Yeah, but I don't think that's exactly saying that a definition is a true statement.
Well, he does explicitly say that it has a truth value, and it can't have a truth value without being a truth statement, if it is also a statement.
A truth value.
I mean,
Um,
if I if
so for instance, if you say that is a red apple,
mhm.
what's the truth in that? I mean, humans decided to name that an apple, and they decided to call that color red. What does that have to do with the truth?
It is true that they made that decision. That's the
Yeah,
truth.
okay, that I completely agree with.
But
I
that's
mean,
the
you could
point.
say that about any historicism.
You mean any
You know?
historical fact? Yes, you could. But the fact is that that's what lexical definitions are: reports on historical fact, and reports
I
on
find that a
historical
bit
fact.
trivial to use his term.
I mean, like, and he says, if you don't think it's important, that's fine. That's just a matter of personal preference, what it is that you decide to take an interest in. But that doesn't make it false. It remains true that it has a truth value, and that's really the question being asked. The question being asked is not whether you care.
Oh, okay, what's the question being asked?
Does the definition have a truth value? Not is it trivial or not that it has a truth value?
Well, why are we asking if it has a truth value? What does that mean
Because
in our
if it
lives?
has a truth value, it can be false. Definitions
Yeah.
can be false.
Well, I don't find this a convincing argument for realism.
It's not an argument for realism.
That's what I felt coming away from that.
Well,
You
let's
know,
focus on the issue. He's not asking about realism in this passage. What he's asking about is whether lexical definitions have truth value. And either they do or they don't. And if you don't find it compelling, I would ask you, what part of the argument do you think missteps? There are premises, there's a conclusion, and there are steps from the premises to the conclusion. It isn't enough for you simply not to like it.
um, well, I just feel like the phenomenon that happens when humans come along and name objects has nothing to do with truth value. Now, the fact that they did come along and name that object, yes, that does have a truth value.
But that's the,
So that's a statement about the definition. That's not the
no, no,
definition
no, no, no,
itself.
no. That is the definition. The definition is the statement about the historical fact. And the statement about the historical fact is true if there is such a fact. If I say, for instance, that Napoleon was the emperor of China, okay, that's a historical falsehood because it's a statement about the past and it is false.
How is it a definition?
It isn't. But the point here is that definitions, lexical definitions, are statements about the past. Not that all statements about the past are lexical definitions. Lexical definitions are statements about how a word has been used in a given population.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
and those
Yeah.
statements are either true or false.
Yeah. I mean, what Dr. Johnson says about his dictionary is that he tried to use, basically the tradition in England of how these words were used. Uh,
Except in the case of past term.
well, yeah,
But
I
that's
don't
the
know.
point.
That was a
That
French word or
lexical
something.
definition is false. It's a great joke, but some jokes are false.
Well, okay. So I don't know if it's a joke or what. I can't remember on that. I mean, an example of his joke is his definition of monsieur was a term of reproach for a Frenchman.
Okay, well, there you go. It's funny, but it's false. And it doesn't make it any less funny to recognize it as false. It's not in any way meant to chill the humor. But when we're asking the question about truth value and lexical definitions, jokes should not digress us.
True enough. True enough.
Okay,
And
so
and
let it be then.
I'm all into truth and finding the truth.
Well, but here you have
I'm just
this.
reflecting that I don't think it's true that definitions.
Not all definitions.
But look, we've argued this. So.
But the thing is, um, okay, when an argument is presented and you disagree with the conclusion, you must either find the premise that you disagree with or show how the conclusion does not follow from the premise. It is not enough to simply disagree. Because if we simply disagree, and by simply I mean do nothing more than disagree, then we hold argument in contempt. The argument has been presented. You agree with the premise. You disagree with the conclusion.
No. I agreed with the conclusion. I agree with the conclusion.
The conclusion is that lexical definitions have something to do with truth, and you've denied that.
No. I agree with that.
Oh, okay.
I agree with that. Okay,
what is it that you're denying?
But do you see what I'm saying? What you're saying is what he says is the history of lexical definitions has a truth value.
No,
but what I'm saying is
he's not saying that.
To say that rote is rouge. These were two arbitrary words that these two different cultures came up with for red. And so what's the truth value there? That rote is rouge.
That lexical definition, that there is a truth to the history about lexical definitions. That is true, but it is not what he is saying. What he is saying is that lexical definitions are statements about history.
Oh, okay. I'm separating those two. And you're saying that he's saying lexical definitions are actually a claim about history.
Yes, and as such can be true or false. Do you see that now? The point is that
I think that when Dr. Johnson writes in the introduction to his English dictionary that he has used historical definitions, original definitions, that could be a truth claim, whether he did or not. But I don't see how, when he calls, when he says that wealth is riches and affluence, that there's a truth value in that actual definition.
Let's consider the example of Samuel Johnson in a moment. Okay? Or is it Samuel? It is Samuel, right? Let's consider that in a moment and just address the question I asked first, upfront and directly. Is lexical definition a statement about historical fact that can be true or false? Yes or no? Independently of what Johnson did.
Is lexical definition a statement about historical fact?
Yes.
I mean, you'd have to ask him.
I'm not asking about Johnson. I'm asking about lexical definitions.
No. You'd have to, because I don't use the word lexical definition in my life. This is Robinson's word. Now, do I agree that Robinson is saying that?
All right. Yes. Let's start with that.
I can see why you think that. I can get there. I don't have a problem with that. I thought that he differentiated between the actual definition and some historical statement about the definition.
But let's review.
But maybe I read it wrong.
And we can review it. We don't have to remain in ignorance. It was page 39. He says, lexical definitions are historical assertions. That is not ambiguous.
Oh, he says that?
Yeah, at the end of the first paragraph on 39, lexical definitions are historical assertions, and all historical assertions are true or false, insofar as they are definite. Do you have another way of interpreting this?
Okay, no. I see what you're saying. There it is right there. Yeah.
Okay.
He's saying lexical definitions are historical assertions. Okay. All right. So you're right.
Okay. So then the question is, how do they relate to stipulative? And it's an open question whether there even are lexical definitions, right? I mean, his theory could be incorrect. That's fair enough. And in fact, I do believe that his argument against the nominalist in definition is that they think all definitions are stipulative. So let us just accept, by stipulation, that lexical definitions are statements of historical fact, and then leave it an open question whether all definitions, whether any, assuming some definitions are stipulative, which I think all three of us will agree to, you, me, and Robinson, let's leave it an open question whether any definitions are not stipulative, whether any of them are lexical, let alone real, because that's yet another category, right? Okay, turning to
Well,
the
they're historical. They're historical. So here's what I'd say.
That's yet another question. That's yet another question.
All definitions start out as stipulative, but over time they become historical and lexical. In fact, written down by Dr. Johnson, that's when they become historical.
But Theral, at no point in the book does he ever describe definitions as historical or not. So here you're departing from the text. And I would ask you, what do you mean by a historical definition?
You just quoted me. Lexical definitions are historical assertions.
Yes, but they're not historical definitions.
I didn't say historical definitions.
Oh, so when you say definitions are historical, you don't mean that they are historical definitions? You just mean that they are assertions about history? Or
oh, I see. You're trying to tease apart definition and assertion.
It depends on what the word historical is modifying. Is it modifying assertion or is it modifying definition?
Well, he said definitions are assertions. He said lexical definitions are historical assertions.
That's right.
So assertion is just is a definition of definition for him. It's a synonym.
No. Oh, I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing. Yeah. No, I didn't read this as a synonym. I read this as, in fact, we have examples, right? He says in the immediately previous sentence, he says, the people whose language the dictionary was supposed to be about did not use the word in the way that he said that they did. Later, he says, no, I think that's all we get. The question is just, if a definition is a historical assertion, then it is an assertion about how people used the word, how they did use the word.
And that's I find those two different things. Yeah. Oh, so I disagree with him here. Okay, so let me read it. Though a rule is neither true nor false, a statement that certain people observe a certain rule is either true or false. Right. And a lexical definition is such a statement. Right. So I disagree with him there.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm glad we went through this exercise because this now introduces historicism, as I understand it, into the discussion as an alternative to his take on lexical definition, which I agree with. Okay, so let's hold on to that thought and then talk about stipulative definition. I agree with you. I agree with something else that you said. I liked it very much, which is that definitions are, I would prefer to say not definitions, but words and their associated definitions have a history, an evolution, and that they begin as stipulations and then evolve into lexical definitions. Is that what you said?
It's normative. Yeah.
Well, I don't know that, okay, whether or not it's normative is another thing. What I just said was that words and their associated definitions begin with a stipulative definition and end with lexical definitions, whether or not it is normative.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's what I said earlier. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about stipulative definitions, because one of the points that you raised and he addresses, in fact, here he agrees with you, is that stipulative definitions don't have truth value. If I say, henceforth, by democracy, I will mean governments that result from popular election, then you'd have to call Venezuela a democracy, because they did have a popular election, and surely the result of the election is the mess that they are in. The fact that the governing authorities are not exactly who got the most votes is just a variation on the usual way elections proceed. but according to my stipulated definition, that would qualify. Of course, one would then want to modify this stipulation because that's not really what we wanted. But that's just it. Like in a textbook, especially of mathematics or anything that's mathematical in spirit, we just disregard whatever history the chosen word may have had. If, for instance, you define force or energy according to some equation, the fact that in poetry hundreds of years ago we would speak of being forceful or energetic is completely irrelevant. We proceed according to what is specified in the text as legislation and then conform to it, at least for the duration of the text. That's stipulation. The question is, to what extent are the meanings of our words, the meanings of the words in our language, meaningful in virtue of stipulation? To what extent is it even possible to do this, or is it some kind of myth? I agree that stipulation does occur, but I would question whether it means that there's no truth value.
Well, I mean, it has to occur. How do you get the word in the first place?
Well, the
No,
alternative
it
is
doesn't. It
natural meaning.
doesn't pop out as a red light with the word red, and everyone has. They either saw it or they didn't, and they have to abide by it. It
According to
was.
Pascal and Cratylus, it does.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, he gives Pascal really high ratings in this. Says,
Yes. And Cratylus is a character in Plato, and I think Plato gets high ratings too. All right. I want to turn to stipulative definition, in particular, the relation to truth. Robinson has a lot to say about this, and of course, we're not going to be able to treat the whole book. But I think if we focus on truth, then we can dive into the question of realism and nominalism in relation to real definition. I want to actually read what he says. It's on 62. He says, the distinction between lexical and stipulative definition explains the disagreement over the question whether definitions have a truth value. Lexical definitions have a truth value, but stipulative definitions have not. A lexical definition is an assertion that certain people use a certain word in a certain way and is therefore either true or false. A stipulative definition, however, is not an assertion at all. I wonder if this reformulation of lexical definition reconfirms your disagreement with him over the relationship of lexical definition to, or rather, the relationship of definition to historical fact. But moving on. Therefore, since assertions are the only sentences that have a truth value, it has no truth value. It's more like a request to the reader that he will understand the word in a certain way, or a command. And these, though significant utterances, have no truth value. It is a proposal rather than a proposition. It looks to the future, not to the past. This is the fundamental reason why it can be brief and yet satisfactory. It does not have, as every true statement has, the task of following the sinuosities of reality. It's an arbitrary choice. If it succeeds in establishing a usage, the subsequent lexical definition of that usage will not be an arbitrary choice.
mm-hmm.
So,
he's agreeing with that. That it goes from stipulative to lexical.
Yes, yes. But I would go so far. I would amend this. That is, I want to agree with it, but I think that philosophy that's been written since then, particularly in the philosophy of speech acts, has explored how truth can relate to commands and requests in the manner of not truth value, but truth conditions. So a request or a command has truth conditions in the sense that whether or not the request is satisfied, whether or not the command is obeyed, is depends on the truth of what occurs in the future, and that is its truth value indirectly. So if I say past assault, the value of what I say is true if you do indeed past assault, but it should not be confused with truth value as the value of an assertion, because it is in fact not an assertion. So that's where I would say, and the reason that's interesting and important is because the truth conditions, as the definition transitions from being a stipulation to a lexical entry in the vocabulary, remain the same. Otherwise, how could it be that we know what the lexical definition is on the basis of stipulation, if not that the truth conditions of the one derive from the truth conditions of the other? The only thing that changes is that in the latter case, it's an assertion, and in the former case, it's a request.
Well, yes, and the fact that it's time passes is what changes. Time passes,
As
okay?
well.
And when time passes, then you can make a historical assertion.
That's right, because what was in
And
the
I
future
don't
is now
find
in the
that
past.
historical assertion anything to do with the actual definition. I mean, yeah, no, it does have to do with the definition because that's the definition over time. But let me give you an example. Take the word gay. 100 years ago is going to mean happy, sprightly. That's what you'll see in the dictionary.
Right,
Today it's going to mean homosexual.
right.
Okay. Um, so you could make a historical assertion that the definition changed,
And I do.
but the actual definitions themselves seem arbitrary to me.
Well, there is an arbitrariness. The arbitrariness was at the moment of transition in stipulating that it changed in this way. But there isn't any arbitrariness to the historical fact of that stipulation after the fact.
Mhm. Okay. No, I'm totally with you there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now let's,
And
okay.
I agree with that a long time ago. I just called it more trivial. But then you
Yeah,
said, why
well,
would I call it trivial? So I guess that's what we're getting into.
well, I mean, whether or not it's trivial is partly subjective, although I don't want to hang my hat on that. Um, one man's triviality is another man's, hobby. But
True. But the reason I'm saying that is because he says that so often. He dismisses people all the time in this book and by
yes,
calling it trivial. Um, by the way, I don't know if that historical assertion, it's not trivial that the word gay changed. That's not trivial. I take that back.
okay, okay. Uh, However, I think the reason that you're inclined to think that there's a triviality to the arbitrariness of these definitions, of the stipulated definitions, is likely an echo of your nominalism with respect to real definition.
Okay,
So let
let's
me
go there.
briefly just recount what it is that he says with real definition. Very, very quickly, what he does is he first surveys all the different cases that have been called real definition throughout the history of philosophy to the present day, well, to 1950. And the conclusion he comes to is that half the time it's a mistake. That is, there really isn't anything going on because they are in pursuit of what cannot be found, or there is something going on, but it's really just nominal definition masquerading as real definition. That
Well,
is,
well, give some examples. Like he thinks that they're pursuing an essence, or he thinks that they're, trying to get at some ideal definition.
yeah. So, for example, when Socrates asks, "What is virtue?" There may well be no such thing as virtue. That is, there may not be some reality that all virtuous behavior have in common. That might be difficult to accept if you have a certain view of things, but I think we'll all agree about love. It's commonplace now to recognize that the love you have of baseball, of your mother, of your wife, or of yourself are not all exactly the same kind of thing. And in fact, in Greek, we've commonly observed that we have agape, philia, eros, and the others. And in English, we also have affection, fondness, desire. Well, not desire, but whatever it is.
Desire, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, sure. Actually, in Spinoza, desire and love come closely together. So the point is, if you try to look for the thing that they all have in common, you might be left empty-handed. And real definition seems to be the pursuit of that common reality. Another is the identification of an essence. Robinson, without justification, although certainly not without good company, is anti-essentialist. He thinks that Aristotle was simply wrong, and calls that out. There's also search for a common cause of things. Sometimes the search for definition is really the pursuit of the origins of some reality. All of these are covered up at some length in Robinson, but I want to focus on what he does admit may well be real definition, properly so called. And that is when we analyze something. For example, we might analyze water and find that it is a composite of oxygen and hydrogen. That is, we identify some other things that make up the thing in question. Or when we, by synthesis, which is the opposite of analysis, identify something in relation to other things. We might, for instance, define brother as being part of a family such that such that there is a child by the same parents. Okay, that's being part of something larger and gives meaning to the word brother. And then there's abstraction, where you give various examples. Let's say doves, uh, swallows, penguins, and the like, and say that that's a bird. So the definition of bird here is given not as the disjunction of this, that, or the other thing, but rather what can be discerned as common to them by abstraction, so that some other species that wasn't mentioned might also be called a bird or recognized as a bird. His point here is that these are not merely assignments of words to things, but rather derive from a understanding, a developed understanding of the things analyzed, synthesized, or abstracted from. And insofar as doing so, here I'll use the famous phrase, carves nature at the joints, then it upholds something to be named by the description real definition. Now he expresses some pessimism as to whether it's useful to call this real definition as opposed to simply analysis, synthesis, and abstraction. But then relents, recognizing that we have a long history of doing so. We may as well do the best that we can in recognizing its resemblances and commonalities to nominal definition, provided that we make great effort to, whenever we speak of definition, being very explicit as to whether we're talking about word-word definition, word-thing definition, or thing-thing definition. And finally, inasmuch as this is possible at all, I think this supports realism. Nominalism is fundamentally, I claim, the position that we never truly do analyze, synthesize, or abstract, except as might be assimilated to the activity of stipulative definition.
Okay, can I respond?
Yeah.
My nominalism has to do with the word water and gold, going back to Locke, Putnam. So I do realize that there are oceans out there. There is the Atlantic Ocean. There are individual instances of water. The question that a nominalist has is whether there would be the concept of water if humans weren't here. Okay.
Yeah.
And we haven't even talked about concepts, by the way. I did find one criticism on this book. And it was not like we're doing. I mean, we're not really criticizing it. We may take issues here and there, but it's really a helpful book. But their criticism was rather than go from word to thing, they propose, and then you can use all the rest of Robinson, that you go from word to concept of a thing. Okay, so they wanted some kind of intermediate in there, and I can get you the paper on this.
Who's it by?
I can't remember.
He does speak to concepts, actually. He does speak to concepts. And maybe we've gone too far to get to address that, but maybe we can take that up at some other point. It's worth saying.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
If nothing else, I think it's worth saying that conceptualism is a kind of middle position between nominalism and realism, though far closer to nominalism than to realism.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I found that more attractive.
Well, of course,
their idea that they would
use.
Okay, so am I a nominalist? But I'm not nominalist about every single word. And I don't deny reality.
Well, look, nominalism is not the denial of reality.
Well, I agree. I don't think we should contrast nominalism with realism. I don't think those are two sides of a spectrum. I think you're right.
Well, no, I think they are, but I don't think realism should be considered the thesis that there is reality. It's thicker than that. It is that we are actually referring to it, and that the meanings of our words are the things themselves as opposed to concepts or just other words. But the nominalist doesn't deny reality. He only denies our, you might say, linguistic access to it.
Well, he questions that, particularly these general terms.
Yes, of course. Yeah, especially
like water or bird, like water or bird. But I don't deny, a blue jay lands on my front railing on my porch, and someone says that's a blue jay. I mean, I have no problem with that.
Yes. No, I recognize that. You'd have to be extremely unusual to deny that. But nominalists are not unusual at all. What they deny is not reality, and as you said, they don't deny the reality of names of particulars, what we call here proper names. What they deny is that general names refer to, and let's just use the word, real universals or real forms. That's what they deny.
Yes. Right. So what are those forms? Because it's when the bird lands, I mean, we call it a bird, but we got to get into this at some point. Let's take the word gene. I mean, we got to read some John Dupre and the ambiguity in biology. Biology's built on this whole taxonomy and genus and family and species. But the truth is, there's no clean line between species. So when you're talking joints of the world, um, the nominalist just wants to point out that it depends on who's naming the joints, whether those are actually joints. And so let's take the word gene. I mean, we've been talking about genetics. Um, I see it as kind of I see it as an ongoing stipulative definition. In fact, all definitions may be ongoing stipulative definitions, where it has inspired researchers. Mendel got it kind of right enough that you wanted to go deeper, and then they went deeper, and then you got Watson and Crick, and then they went in even deeper. But it's challenged all the previous notions of gene.
I mean, okay.
So,
Yes.
so I love the activity that they're in there looking, they're getting data, and they're looking at nature. I
I,
love all that, and we have to call it something at some point. So what John Dupre says is we'll probably come up with a new term,
right.
but gene is what people have now.
I agree that especially in research, that is in intellectual investigation broadly, inclusive not only of science but philosophy as well, definitions are usually a hybrid of lexical and stipulation. That merely using a term is a kind of indirect, implicit stipulation for its ongoing application. Assuming the word isn't just so baked into the language that you can't get rid of it at that point. Gene would
Mm,
certainly be one of those because it's only
mm,
100 years old, 1 or 200 years old. Uh, so, but and secondly, with respect to species, there's a problem here. There's a historical problem in that metaphysics, as introduced by Aristotle, being the biologist that he was,
mm,
gave as paradigmatic examples the species of life, animal species, plant species. But in recent philosophy of biology, it has come to pass that that one defense of realism is to reconceive of the species not as general terms, but as particular terms, where each species is not so much a kind, but an individual, that is an individual lineage. And then
mm.
this repositions our expectations with respect to how these naming processes work. I take that view myself. I think that was introduced by David Hall. So Dupre's argument against general terms being successfully essentialist in biology, I think doesn't argue against essentialism so much as it argues against the existence of biological essence. And the idea being that what we find in biology is just a lot of particulars. Not that there aren't any essences at all, but those essences would be more properly recognized as biochemistry and physics and mathematics.
Oh, okay. That's going very basic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I mean, that's what we've got. Of course, there's always within a given context relative essence, but that's always subject to puncture when you break out of the context and recognize the exceptions. So that there's a lot to say there. But
So I'm actually cool with essence. I may even be more cool with essence than Robinson, and I'm cool with
you best friend.
realism. I'm cool with realism.
Well,
The fact that he goes and wants to point to realism, I just have a problem with the term real definition.
yes, but
That's It's almost a paradox for me.
realism is not the view that some things are real. You have to, again, realism is the view that there is such a thing as real definition, that there is such a thing as carving nature at its joints, that there is
Oh,
such a thing as recognizing the categories of general terms as they are independently of the choices made by the speaker. That's realism.
oh,
It's
okay.
about mind
So you're
independence.
oh, so you're defining our future. One future show would be to define realism
Well, as long as it's a real
because
definition.
yeah, because apparently we have different definitions. By the way, you get this all the time with
Oh,
words.
yes. Yeah.
right? Even if I say bird, um, you're going to imagine something different in your mind than I do.
Well, I'm not sure
Does that
imagination
bother
has
you?
anything. No, because I don't think meaning has anything to do with what we're imagining.
Oh, huh.
Yeah, like if
Okay.
like if I say France, I imagine my most recent vacation to France. I have no idea what you're imagining, but that doesn't mean that what I mean by France is different from what you mean by France. We're talking about the same country, not about our vacations.
Hmm. Well, and what is that? What is that country? Um, I don't know if we have the same idea of the country.
Well, similarly, we might have differences regarding what a country even is. That may not result in very much practical ambiguity when it comes to France, but it would when it comes to, say, Gaza or Tibet.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, probably the best thing we could agree on with France is the geographical borders, the
Yeah, but
map.
that's the least interesting part of it.
I guess definitions are a kind of map, um, but they belie a lot of ambiguity. And by the way, we haven't even got into connotation versus denotation,
Oh, there's so much here.
and
Yes,
multiple meanings and multiple senses for the same word. You
that's
know.
right. That's right. Well, I think we've got an initial stab at it. I think my takeaways here. Let's close this out. So I think my takeaway here is that the outstanding difference between us is going to turn on your historicist reconception of the relation of history to lexical definitions on the one hand, and second, on your skepticism of the mind independence of whatever positive things can be said about real definition, that is to say, analysis, synthesis, and abstraction. And
Hmm.
and I would just explore those topics further to take this further. Which, and of course, speaking of those issues that we didn't address at all, like ambiguity and connotation and denotation. However, I don't think those will amount to very much difference between us. I think it's the first two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, uh, I think it's been a great discussion, a great argument. I do think we have different positions, and we've come closer to figuring out what those differences are. I wonder if there was something in the biology discussions that you felt like a better definition of definition might help me with um, as we go forward. You know, um,
Yes.
so I'm kind of curious about, again, why you brought this up at this time. I think there was a reason, and I'm really curious to find out because I want to learn it.
There are two reasons. One, because we I don't think we have the same definition of reduction, and I was taken aback by the result of trying to settle on the difference. It seemed as though there was no easy path by which we could coordinate our meanings and still retain both your intuitions and my intuitions. And so I thought maybe it were a closer exploration of what role definitions play in disputation might help us with that. I don't think that we got there because he's explicitly setting disputations to the side. However, we made several steps in that direction. The second reason was with respect to the words function and information. Now,
Mm,
the paper on gene was obviously about the definition of gene. I don't think we were too confused about that. I think we managed to understand each other. But on the question of function and information, we were we weren't exactly aligned. But here, the question was, what does the author mean by those?
hmm.
And I think the reason we read that differently was because, to use the language of Robinson, we maybe didn't always recognize what he's saying is either stipulative or lexical in the same way. So without knowing that Robinson was going to introduce the distinction between lexical and stipulative definitions, I find that it is an answer to our problem, which is that when there's a difference of view as to what a word means, uh, I think the first order of the day is to first identify whether it's a word-word definition, word-thing definition, or thing-thing definition, at least in intention by the author. And secondly, whether it is lexical or stipulative, and then take it from
Yeah,
there.
you're right. So these are some new tools that we have going forward.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I also learned that maybe I didn't read the text closely enough on this whole truth value thing, which I appreciate you, taking me directly to the authors, to the text. But the new tools of stipulative and lexical actually could help us with the reductionism. Maybe I think reductionism is more stipulative, and you think it's more lexical. So that
I think,
could be where we hung up.
as I said earlier, in any kind of investigative discipline, there's going to be a hybrid of both. So there's going to be a lexical aspect to it because the conversation is very old, and there's going to be a stipulative aspect to it, in as much as the various authors that we read will offer uh, um, pres- uh, refinements of the meaning by way of making more precise how they intend to use it, which may or may not align with the lexical history. Typically does, but with some differences. And the result then is that every paper you read on reductionism may well be about a new subject, although to the extent that they overlap, it is worth collecting them under a single heading.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, I think you got it exactly. So I'm looking forward to what comes next.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Until next time. Bye.